Hello, everybody. Welcome to Middle East Now. First, our headlines. The plea from a female soldier, a hostage in Gaza. The IDF began releasing its investigations into the operational meltdown on October 7. And what are the first steps from Iran's newly elected president? Daniela Gilboa, a young soldier that was stationed near the Gaza border, was kidnapped by Hamas on October 7th. Today, her family released a video of her from 6 months ago, hoping that might push the deal forward. I-24 News' Nicole Tzedek reports.
As talks on a ceasefire and hostage release deal are seemingly moving forward, the family of Israeli hostage Daniela Gilboa, an IDF spotter, approved airing a video of her from captivity, released in January by Hamas as a psychological warfare ploy.
I've been a prisoner of Hamas for 107 days, and I don't know when, if at all, I'll return home. I'm under bombs and fire 24 hours a day. I'm very, very afraid for my life. You even once almost killed me with your bombs.
Gilboa was taken captive from the Nahal Oz base on October 7th. She was one of the 5 female soldiers seen in the recently released video of the abduction from the base. Gilboa's family permitted airing the video, with her mother, Orly, begging Israeli leaders to reach a deal that will see the release of the hostages.
Where were you on October 7th when I was kidnapped from my bed? Where are you now? Why should I, as a soldier who gave 100% of myself in service of my country, feel that I have been abandoned and forsaken? Get over yourselves, dear government, and start doing your job as is necessary. Bring us home while we're still alive.
The video comes as Shin Bet chief Ronan Bar met with CIA chief Bill Burns and Egyptian security officials in Cairo on Monday, where they discussed the Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal, as well as arrangements to secure the Egypt-Gaza border. Ahead of the meeting, Hamas accused Prime Minister Netanyahu of raising obstacles on the negotiations, warning that continued IDF operation in the Gaza Strip could derail the talks, which are expected to continue in Doha on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the IDF continues its operation in Gaza City, in the north of the Strip, and in Rafah to the south. The military said its forces eliminated dozens of terrorists over the past day and destroyed different terror infrastructure, including 6 underground tunnels in Gaza City's Shajaya neighborhood alone. Operations that show no sign of slowing down unless a hostage release deal is pushed ahead.
By the way, Danielle's mother, the soldier, the mother Orly, told me today that her daughter was not so assertive as she may look in this video. She said she's fragile and her mental condition is not good at all. That's the fact. Now, here in the studio, Dan Perry, former Europe and Middle East editor at AP. Good evening, Dan. People are confused. There are like positive reports coming out of Cairo and Qatar and the States, not so much in Israel. Where do we stand on this deal?
Well, you can lose your mind trying to make it through the labyrinth of complicated details about the first, second, and third stages and the various waterfalls of things that have to happen and tripwires and conditions, or you can look at the essence. And the essence is that for 8-9 months, Hamas has not wavered from their position, that after the initial batch of hostages, they are demanding an end of the war for the exchange of the remaining hostages. I'm not skeptical about that position because I think Hamas observes that the war is terrible for Israel on a whole variety, on a breathtaking variety of dimensions. And so it's a bit of a strategic victory for them that way. Of course, it's even far more terrible for the people of Gaza, but of this, they care nothing, obviously. And on the other hand, Israel appears to have difficulty in accepting a difficult reality, and it is human nature to struggle with a horrible choice. And Israel's horrible choice is basically to end the war, more or less admitting that they failed to completely dislodge Hamas and get the rest of the hostages, or prolong the war, hoping for a better ultimate outcome, but it's rather clear that that involves the sacrifice of many, if not all, of the remaining hostages. This is a terrible choice, but it is reality. And It's natural, but at times also infantile to run away from a terrible choice. Netanyahu clearly is uncomfortable with making the choice that public opinion in Israel would favor right now, which is ending the war. Because he calculates, I think correctly, like Hamas does, that that would bring down his government. Because the far right, on which his government depends, prefers an end to the war, a continuation of the war, and indeed a reestablishment of Jewish settlement in Gaza, which, by the way, would mean that the land that Israel currently controls, Israel plus West Bank plus Gaza and is settling, has an Arab majority. Netanyahu is running away from this reality and trying to buy time for his government. And in the meantime, people are dying on all sides.
Let me bring in Ambassador Daniel Sheikh, who, by the way, advises the hostage families on international diplomacy. Good evening to you, Ambassador Sheikh.
Good evening, Jacob.
What's your take on the negotiations right now?
Well, you know, in the end of the day, a negotiation succeeds up to a certain stage. You negotiate the content. After that, it's just a question of both sides wanting it to succeed at the same time. There's, you know, the comma here, the word there. There's not a real discussion about substance. We know the general contours of a deal. But we haven't reached that point, apparently, yet, that both sides are motivated to succeed. Sometimes it's one of them that topples it in the last moment. Sometimes it's both. I agree that there is a choice, but the choice is not just a question of what is more important. I honestly don't know if it's more important to defeat Hamas or to bring the hostages back. I definitely know what is more urgent. It is urgent to bring back the hostages. And quite honestly, I don't quite understand the concept of what ending the war means. We've been at war with Hamas for decades, on and off. And I don't quite understand the problematics of ending the war.
Dan?
The problematics of ending the war is that the extreme right will bring down Netanyahu's government, and that will indeed hasten the long-delayed reckoning over the epic and almost literally unbelievable failures of October 7th, which in any parliamentary system would involve the government being defenestrated. That is the problem with ending the war. I certainly agree with you, Ambassador Sheikh, that there really is no ending the war if Hamas stays in power. You can assume A, that they will provoke a new war, and B, that
precisely.
Yeah, and B, that there will always be another day when you can bring them down, versus the fact that the hostages may not have that many days left to live. This is indeed why you see increasingly agitated leaks by current security establishment people and open exhortations by a wide array, politically wide array of former senior establishment people, and polls showing that 2/3 to 3/4 of the Israeli public want a deal, which would mean leaving Hamas in power. Now look, I think Ambassador Sheikh and I and almost all of the viewers of this channel would prefer that Hamas are not in power in Gaza. And any rational Palestinian would prefer the same, without a shadow of a glimmer of a doubt. But the reality is that it's been 9 months, and that has taken a toll on Israel's international standing, on the economy, on the high tech of the country on which its exports depend, and on the overall karma of society here, not to mention the parallel war in the north that threatens to become a regional conflagration if you get a little bit unlucky and some shell hits a kindergarten.
Right, we'll get to the north.
Lord.
We'll get to the north later also. I want to ask you, Ambassador Sheikh, as one who knows the families, or at least a large portion of the hostage families, what's the level of faith or the lack of faith they have in Israeli government right now?
Well, you know, I'm not sure I can gauge that. You know, you look at the demonstrations every Saturday night, the number of people who move from Hostage Square, where it's more of a gathering, a rally, and who move to Begin Gate, not far away, to merge with the anti-government demonstrations, and that probably gives you an idea. But you know, I spent most of the day there today, and it's always very strange to me how the atmosphere there changes with the with the news about imminent deals. We've been in this scenario several times over the past few months, and in most cases there is huge skepticism. There is huge disappointment when suddenly something happens, like yesterday's statement by the Prime Minister, which clearly makes the conclusion of this deal at this point very difficult. But strangely enough, today I encountered many optimistic people. They don't have a reason. It's not that they know something that you and I don't, but it's kind of a state of mind, maybe. And, you know, I really, really hope that they won't be disappointed yet again.
Let's hope so. Ambassador, let me pick your mind on a different issue. As a former ambassador to France and an expert on French politics, what's your assessment of the election results vis-a-vis the Middle East?
Well, the honest answer is that there is no answer for the moment, because we don't know what kind of government will emerge. We don't know the name of the prime minister, who will be foreign minister, what will be the majority in the parliament. I will say, though, that in the French system, the president has sort of a prerogative over foreign policy and defense. He is the buck stops at the Élysée. He has the last word on these things. So quite honestly, regardless of what the government will be, I don't see any major changes in French foreign policy. And the fears that the extreme left, which is very pro-Palestine, pro-Hamas, I would say, in many cases, I don't really believe that they will have any real impact on France's stance, which throughout the war, despite some statements that might annoy some Israelis, they have been really very, very good.
Ambassador Daniel Sheikh, I thank you very much. Dan, here in the studio, France plus Britain.
Yeah, there's a big irony in France, which is that a lot of Jews wanted the National Rally, formerly known as National Front, to win the election, even though they're a fascist adjacent party, and even though Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie Le Pen, who founded it, once called the gas chambers a detail or a minor detail in World War II. He was almost proudly anti-Semitic. And the reason, of course, is that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And right now, the National Rally in France has bigger problems than the Jews. They dislike the Muslims. That's the issue with Jean-Luc Mélenchon and the far left in France. And I have to say, if the ultimate result is a coalition between Ensemble, the center, and parts of the left could have power. And that could make it difficult for Macron to execute a pro-Israel policy. I'm not completely sanguine about that issue. In Britain, again, a hugely interesting election result. Everyone talks about a Labour landslide, but in fact, that's just because the right splintered. And in their electoral system, that guarantees a victory of the other side. But Starmer only got about 1.8% of the vote, more than Corbyn, and a lot less than Corbyn got in a previous election. It's not by any means a strong mandate for the Labour Party, and one of the reasons why they didn't get as many votes as they thought is because of a rebellion by leftists and Muslims who ran basically a pro-Palestine ticket. In Britain, too, the anti-Israel left and the political power of the Muslims may prove to be a headache for Israel in coming years.
All right, speaking about right, the extreme right minister here in Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, wants more clout on the war decisions and threatens to break Netanyahu's government. I-24 News' Emma Siegel reports on that.
Once again, it looks as though Israel's government is in crisis. On Monday night, Public Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir refused to vote in favor of a bill put forward by the ultra-Orthodox Shas party. The hardline Ben-Gvir has been angling for months to be included in Israel's now-defunct war cabinet. And this latest move is a tactic to be allowed to have greater say in Israel's war with Hamas. But his gamble didn't pay off. After Ben-Gvir's party conditioned its support for the vote, the government pulled the legislation from the docket, and a number of Shas members of Knesset walked out of the session in protest. Shas then released a heated statement taking personal aim at Ben-Gvir.
The right-wing bloc discovered again this evening that as regards the inflated balloon named Itamar Ben-Gvir, as great the expectation, so strong is the disappointment. Neither right nor strong. A series of embarrassing failures in his area of responsibility, while spraying responsibility, threats and accusations on the whole world. A noise machine and zero action. Ben-Gvir, in his childish behavior and insanity with his arrogance, is doing everything to destroy the government from within, destroy its foundations, and loyally serves the political parties on the left. Right-wing governments have always been overthrown by people of his type. The public will know and judge.
In response, Ben-Gvir slammed Shas leader Aryeh Deri as, quote, a lapdog of the left, and also targeted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
The absurd reality in which we're floundering in Gaza, on the northern border, handcuffing the IDF, conducting negotiations with promiscuous opening conditions, on the way to a political settlement that is all surrender to terrorism on all fronts. When the Prime Minister conducts himself as a one-man government, makes the decisions alone, and isolates his natural partners in the government, including cabinet meetings that are emptied of meaningful content, it is intolerable.
And now, according to Israeli Khan media network, Deri told the Prime Minister that, quote, there is no point for the government to continue if it is not functioning. The infighting aggravates already strained relations between members of the coalition, which observers say and opponents hope could be moving closer to collapse.
Dan, here in the studio, we've seen a lot from this government. The question is this a serious crisis this time? Nobody knows.
Like all coalition governments, it has many stripes, and not every stripe likes the other. As I watch this infighting, I'm reminded of Menachem Begin in the early 80s, who, upon seeing that Iran and Iraq went to war with each other, said, we wish both sides great success. I think Israeli liberals are watching this and thinking the same thing when they observe the Haredi parties and the ultra-nationalist parties at loggerheads. It's not inconceivable that a guy like Ben-Gvir brings down a government if he calculates that he'll emerge somehow stronger, or that its days are numbered anyway. And there's a little bit of what Americans call a game of chicken, who will do it first.
Right.
Because the Haredim could bring down a government if indeed no solution is found to their various issues, in particular the drafting of yeshiva students.
Anyway, at this point, too many parties have too many reasons to bring down the government, so we'll have to wait and see. As we speak about politics, rockets in the north, I-24 News' Zach Anders is live there with the update. What's happening, Zach?
Yeah, well, within the last half hour, we had another alarm come in the Golan. From what we're hearing at this point, the rockets that were fired from Lebanon at both the north and southern ends of the Golan Heights fell in open areas. There were no casualties, no direct hits. This is one of a handful. There's been 3 at this point in the day that Hezbollah has claimed responsibility for these attacks on northern Israel. Quieter day yesterday. Of course, we're coming off the backs of that large barrage now some 2 days ago that was targeting positions as far south as Tiberias and caused damage to multiple homes and injured an Israeli and an American inside the military exclusion zone. This, as we're watching, is all taking shape while we know that there has been a targeted killing inside Syria, just on the border between Lebanon and Syria, of a former bodyguard of Hassan Nasrallah, who in his younger years was participating in this role or acted in this role as a bodyguard, but then came on to be this confidant of Nasrallah. At least that's what is being reported in Saudi media channels. Rose up the ranks and then became a key element of Hezbollah's weapons shipping through Syria into Lebanon. He was purportedly killed in this airstrike along with 2 other occupants inside this vehicle. It was right there on the border between Lebanon and Syria. We're still working to put together some of the details. Hezbollah has confirmed his death, but has not said what his rank or title was within Hezbollah at the time of his death. This does bring the count now, roughly. It really depends on how you're putting together this math. But based on from what Hezbollah has reported and a few additional deaths that Hezbollah hasn't reported that we have tracked, 364 now have been killed inside Hezbollah's ranks since the start of this conflict, including the man that was killed today. We don't have word on the occupants of the other vehicles, presuming they're also involved in some capacity with Hezbollah as well. This was also on a sedan, so while we talk a lot about his role as involved with the weapons shipments, it should be noted that at the time they were in a passenger vehicle, not in some sort of vehicle that looked like it would be carrying weapons back and forth, like a big 18-wheeler or a truck of some sort. And we're still reeling and still trying to learn more about more video that Hezbollah has posted showing sensitive military sites of the Golan Heights. You'll remember the last time they did this about 3 weeks ago. It was footage from the coastal areas and from the port of Haifa, and the IDF came out and said that there was, in fact, a drone that was not intercepted, detected flying over these areas. That raised huge question marks then. Now, with this additional footage that has been released, knowing that this is on the east of this area that they had been before, that it's in a landlocked area, big question marks as to how they were able to obtain this additional footage. It's 9 minutes long, the clip they've released today, although about 4 minutes of it is new video and materials of different sites. And again, they're showing off air defense systems, writing in Arabic what's significant about what's showing on screen. Again, Hezbollah claiming that they have the capabilities to hit these should this develop into a hot, direct confrontation, that Hezbollah claiming they know exactly where to hit first, showing this footage of the Golan Heights. Again, really remarkable stuff. We have not seen a comment yet from the IDF on this latest video leak.
Right. As we speak, more sirens there in the Golan Heights area. Thank you very much, Zach. Dan, Hezbollah created a direct linkage between Gaza and what's happening there. But recently, as of like a couple days ago, there are some doubts that this linkage exists or will exist.
The linkage is a little bit outrageous because Hezbollah is Shiite Lebanese and it's not Palestinians. The idea that they should have carte blanche to shell Israel out of solidarity with a third party is absurd. What I saw in recent days was when Hamas believed that, or at least wanted to project that it believes, that a deal may be possible with Israel, Hezbollah doubled down on the linkage and sort of tried to give Israel incentive by saying, yeah, that will mean an end to the war. Whether or not there's linkage, and whether or not they stop their attacks on Israel, or what is now mutual attacks, if this tit for tat in the north somehow winds down, Israel will still face a very difficult question of whether to initiate action in the north against Hezbollah to move them back from the border. And to force the implementation of Security Council Resolution 1701.
That's a big dilemma.
A huge dilemma, and it attaches to a fundamental question: is Lebanon a country that is a country? We've normalized something completely absurd, which is that countries are being hijacked by Iranian proxies and our territory used to attack other countries, and this somehow seems almost reasonable. Yeah. I fail to see why the world community doesn't view this as an international emergency and a breakdown of the global order.
Speaking of which, the Yemen problem is far from over, and it is an international one. Shipping is still disrupted, Gulf nations are worried, and Israel is being attacked by drones and missiles every now and then. I-24 News' Jody Notilovitz has more.
An Israeli Air Force jet downed a suspicious aerial object late Monday night as it was heading to Israel's southern city of Eilat from the direction of the Red Sea. The aerial object was most likely sent by Yemen's Houthi terrorists, whose military spokesman, Yahya Sari, claimed the operation was a success without divulging more information.
The Yemeni armed forces, alongside the Iraqi Islamic resistance, carried out a joint military operation targeting a vital target in al-Rashrash, south of occupied Palestine, with a number of drones.
This latest incident comes after last week's attack launched by the group on a ship traveling through the same area, only the most recent in a series of targets in this crucial maritime route. Adding further fuel to the fire, the Houthis, who claim that the US and Saudi Arabia sought to economically destroy Houthi-controlled Yemen after failing militarily, released aerial footage of key ports and airports in Saudi Arabia, aiming to remind them that they are still capable of striking deep inside the kingdom. Since November, the Iranian-backed Houthis have been launching drone and missile strikes in shipping lanes, in what the group claims is solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza.
The Yemeni armed forces will persist to carry out their joint military operation with the Iraq Islamic Resistance in support of and solidarity with the Palestinian people until the aggression stops and the siege on the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip is lifted.
In an effort to discourage more attacks, the US-British naval coalition stationed in the region has conducted air raids and missile strikes against Houthi targets. Meanwhile, in an effort to push the Yemen peace plan forward, a Chinese diplomat announced that Beijing, along with the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, 5 permanent UN Security Council members, and other key parties would begin working together.
We must ensure the Red Sea security and make our position clear to the Houthis and other parties. The Red Sea crisis has lasted nearly 6 months, causing significant losses. We call for an end to these attacks.
He added that China would be closely monitoring the Red Sea situation, but urged an end to attacks on commercial vessels to avoid disrupting global supply chains.
We'll take a short break, and when we come back, what are the first steps from Iran's newly elected president? In a moment.
I had the mahala, I did an operation, and I had 34 treatments of radiation. After the treatments, I was halash, very, very tired. I couldn't even drive a car. A friend of mine says, Moshe, please, try the Z Medicare machine. I'm gonna bring it to you. I said, I don't need it, I don't need it. After 3 days, I started driving, and I felt better. Since then, I'm always using the machine Z Medicare.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Oh my goodness. Have you ever seen? And you always want to feed them that way, with their feet down. He's like, I don't have time. Either Africa or Asia. Okay, this is Africa. Okay, she's.
Diagnosed with something called cerebellar.
Welcome back to Middle East Now. First steps from Iran's newly elected president, Masoud Pezeshkian. That includes a letter to Hezbollah leaders in Lebanon. I-24 News' Ariel Osran has more on that.
Iran has a new president, but those who hoped to see a true reformist rather than a regime loyalist are in for a disappointment.
I consider your vote a heavy responsibility on my shoulders, and I pledge to continue to be a listening ear for your words and a voice for the voiceless and rejected.
In his first public appearance as president, Iran's newly elected president, Masoud Pezeshkian, reminded everyone who actually calls the shots in Tehran.
First, the Supreme Leader must be thanked, because if the Supreme Leader were not present, my name definitely would not have come out the ballot boxes.
In his first days in office, Pezeshkian received a flurry of congratulatory messages from Axis supporters. His first phone call was to Russian President Vladimir Putin, where Pezeshkian promised to strengthen the bond between Tehran and Moscow. And Pezeshkian's first letter to a foreign leader was to Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah, in which he vowed to continue backing what he and Hezbollah call the resistance.
The Islamic Republic of Iran considers supporting Lebanon, its security, government, people, and resistance a key principle. When necessary, Iran will not hesitate to support Lebanon and its security.
The Iranian spokesperson added that diplomatic channels between Iran and the U.S. remain open, and that negotiations over the nuclear file and sanctions removal are ongoing. As for Washington, it does not expect any changes to Tehran's policies or behavior.
We're not in a position where we're willing to get back to the negotiating table with Iran just based on the fact that they've elected a new president. They're still supporting terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. They're still supporting the Houthis as the Houthis attack ships in the Red Sea. They're still attacking shipping as well. And they're still supplying drones and drone technology and drone expertise to the Russians so that the Russians can continue to kill innocent Ukrainians like they did over the weekend. So no.
The latest example was given on Monday as new satellite images show major expansion at two key Iranian ballistic missile facilities near Tehran, believed to be for boosting missile production. And with Iran continuing to enrich uranium to near weapons-grade levels at record pace, one should not expect significant changes in Iran's policy, if any.
Dan Perry here in the studio. Everybody watches. Will there be any change in Iran?
The idea is ridiculous. I mean, I'm very disappointed in Kirby talking about the Iranians having elected a new president. Is he kidding? Doesn't he know? The election is a farce and a circus and a charade and a sham. I mean, there's no election of any president. Supreme power in Iran lies with the supreme leader and with the council of theocracy and with the Revolutionary Guard, and all the rest of it is just window dressing to pretend like they're a legitimate country. The only good outcome for Iran is regime change, and I have little doubt that 3/4 to 80% of the people would choose it if only they could.
You want to tell me that the Iranians fooled the Americans again?
Hard to believe, but so it would appear.
Yeah. Can we go to the north now? There's an update there. Zach Anders live in northern Israel after another round of rockets. Zach.
Yeah, that's right. We're just getting this in. I'm going to read off my phone a bit here. It looks like we have two in serious condition. There's some images coming in. I'm not sure that we're going to be able to share them, actually. This looks like a direct hit on Dacia, a car, sedan that was traveling on Road 91 in the Golan Heights. This has now been shut down, this area. It looks like, just based on some of the images that we're seeing, this does look like it's being reported as falls in the area as relation to that latest red alarm, the barrage then. But it's really hard to tell. It looks like potentially this the vehicle was struck almost head on. Incredible damage. We're getting reports of two in serious condition from Mata being brought to an area hospital. We assume that's all we have at this point, but Yeah, given the scope of what we're looking at and some of the images that we're getting on scene, these are very, very serious injuries. The car looks like to be engulfed in flames at this point after the passengers were pulled. It's believed that just 2 passengers in the vehicle, but very serious injuries right now. We're being told they are both in critical condition.
Right. The emergency services confirmed that. I am also looking at the picture you're talking about. It looks like really a direct hit in a vehicle. And
Yeah,
that goes
does,
back.
doesn't it?
That goes back to what you've reported before. This video by Hezbollah, like a 10 minutes long video of sensitive targets around northern Israel, and that was released today as part of a hint, like we know where you are.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, a lot of this footage, they really play up. So while it's 10 minutes worth of clip that you can sit down and watch yourself, the way they have edited the footage, it's a little bit of movement on screen and then a cut, a freeze frame, and they show off one site or one particular area. There's probably about 5 or 6 sensitive sites that they show in total in the entire clip. And I've always cautioned, especially since the release of that first Haifa video some 3 weeks ago, that the capability of anyone with internet access to be able to see some of these things, if you have a subscription to a public satellite provider like Maxar or Airbus, you can see some of these things with publicly available satellite data. So it's not that, you know, it's a massive secret that some of these things are there. What is a huge concern is if this proves that Hezbollah was capable of flying their drones, their own drones, which some of these, especially the ones they've been flinging at northern Israel for months, the ones packed with explosives, are large and have a rather large radar signature and show up as a big target to intercept. And they're not very fast either. They're at top speed about 100 miles to 130 miles an hour. So if a drone like that with a big camera was able to circle around at 5,000–6,000 feet on a clear day and take these kind of pictures unabated without any attempt to be intercepted and then fly back into Lebanese airspace, that's a huge concern. And that really raises a lot of questions about the capabilities and really the completeness, the wholeness of an air defense array here in the north that is supposed to detect exactly that and shoot those kind of things down. But not only that, to identify what's in the airspace at any given moment. Some of these very sensitive pieces of military equipment are able to pick up birds and sometimes mistake birds as targets as well. So how can a drone that, you know, again, could be the size of a small sedan go up in the sky and get missed like that and take these kind of pictures? That's a huge concern.
Right. Meanwhile, Zach, thank you for this report. We saw the picture of this direct hit just moments ago on this vehicle in the north. Doesn't look good. 2 seriously wounded passengers confirmed by EMS, and we'll wait for more details later. Dan, this is the kind of thing that when we were talking about miscalculations or some sort of deterioration or escalation, this is the kind of thing that could cause this.
Yeah. Without doubt, what Hezbollah has been doing is an outrage, and we've said that many times. However, often unremarked is the fact that they are trying to calibrate it so that they don't kill too many people. They clearly have the ability to cause greater damage than they've caused, given the amount of projectiles that they have sent. And the concern has been that, as we said before, that it's some errant shell hits a kindergarten or something like this. An unintended hit that might create political pressure or a pretext and force the hand of one side or another. Recall in the 1990s, the hit on Kafr Khana that Israel did not intend to have killed many dozens of people.
In Lebanon, yeah.
In Lebanon, in a previous conflict with Hezbollah, changed the course of that entire war. And the same thing could happen here.
Right. Let's talk about Turkey now. Turkish President Erdogan is in the NATO summit in Washington, D.C. I-24 News' Nicole Sere, good evening to you. One of the touchiest subjects on the agenda is Ukraine-Russia. What does he have in mind?
Certainly, it's going to be talked about quite a bit in the upcoming NATO summit, and the role that Turkey plays in this is pretty critical, as they're walking a fine line between this. They're actually the only country in NATO that isn't on Russia's unfriendly or hate list, so to speak. They do have relations with Russia. However, also, right now, they've been finding this fine line of also still supporting Ukraine during the war. They've given different ammunition, supported them politically as well, voicing their support for Ukraine to join NATO as well. And so this fine line that Turkey is walking right now is really coming to play, because one of the items on the agenda, lots of these NATO countries, they want to see increased funding and munitions and help going towards Ukraine. But right now, Turkey is warning against that, stating that even if we want to support Ukraine, so to say, by actually giving more ammunition to Ukraine, this could be a pretext for Russia to then say that NATO is funding this war and backing Ukraine in a sense. So they're trying to make sure that the NATO alliances kind of stay out of the war when it comes to Russia and Ukraine right now.
Right. You said fine line, I'll say double game by Erdogan.
Certainly.
Is he going to hear something else from NATO, like you can't keep playing this game anymore?
It's difficult because of the role that Turkey plays. Listen, he probably will get some back talk, and as you mentioned, Turkey, Erdogan is no stranger to saying some controversial opinions, certainly very publicly as well. But their role specifically for the NATO alliances, and even where they are geographically, that plays a lot. They're surrounded by different Asian countries, the Middle East, even what their role right now in Cyprus. This is all playing into it, and so as much as a lot of these different NATO countries want to put more pressure on Turkey and even limit some of their funding, which will likely come up, Turkey asking for more munitions and also trying to help its military alliance with the United States. But that's also hard to do when you also have an alliance with Russia. So all of this backhanding games that Turkey is playing, right now it's doing it in not a bad way. It's not getting too much backlash, but still it's got to be careful so that Erdogan doesn't get any more backlash when it comes to the NATO summit.
Right. Dan, you want to comment on that?
I mean, Turkey is very interesting as a NATO member. Of course, we can understand that they play a bit of a double game, or whatever you want to call it, with Russia. They share the Black Sea with Russia, and they're very close, and that's not illegitimate. If you take a higher altitude view, though, look at what happened. NATO is supposed to be the Western alliance of democratic countries arrayed against the axis of resistance, shall we call it. And Turkey, in fact, is no longer the country that was admitted into NATO. When NATO admitted Turkey, in exchange for the Incirlik Air Force Base and the convenience of the land bridge to Asia and the rest of it, Turkey was Turkey that Ataturk built, that was clearly pro-Western, that was reliably run by the army, basically, in a pro-Western way. Erdogan is not that at all. Erdogan could turn on a dime and be allied with Russia, as we see, and yet he's a NATO member. Is this NATO member a friend of NATO? I'm not entirely sure. Remember that NATO's big success was the expansion to Finland and Sweden over the past year or so. He opposed it and barely allowed it. So Turkey is a big problem, but it's not even number one problem of NATO. The number one problem that will cast a pall on this entire summit in Washington is what happens if Trump is elected in November, and there's every chance that he will himself seek to undermine the alliance led by the U.S.
That's a bigger issue. A smaller issue, or actually a stickier issue, but a small country, Cyprus. What's going on with this?
A small country that still Turkey has big eyes on, because when it comes to this, they're warning, basically, Cyprus not to get involved when it comes to Hezbollah and the war that's kind of looming over in the north. Erdogan is very, very vocal. He continues to support the Palestinian resistance and the axis of resistance, so to speak. And so when it comes to Hezbollah, they continue to say that they will support Lebanon no matter what. And it was just last 2 weeks ago, actually, that the Turkish foreign minister claimed that Turkey has some intelligence documents that Cyprus has been allowing its airspace to be used by certain countries to conduct different flights and reconnaissance missions over its airspace when it comes to the war in Gaza. Now, it didn't say which countries, but this caught Turkey's attention and said, hey, stay out of the war when it comes to the war in the north and the war in Gaza, and don't let Israel take advantage of your airspace. And so it's a small country, but Turkey's still kind of warning them. This is the EU's member state that has the closest proximity to Lebanon. So Turkey's still stating, okay, make sure that you aren't getting too close. Cyprus, on the other hand, also says this is no way a legitimate claim, and we haven't let anyone use this airspace, specifically not Israel.
By the way, lest we forget, Turkey can control much of Cyprus's airspace because 50 years ago they occupied half of it, and there they remain.
Right. Too many wars in this region. Nicole Sadek, thank you very much for that. Narendra Modi met with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Columnist Ekta Kumar is with us now from Delhi. Good evening.
Hi, Jacob.
Why Russia? Why now? By the way, for the first time since the Ukraine invasion.
Well, who knows how the calendars of world leaders work, Jacob, but I think this was expected, India and Russia are kind of entrenched on so many different fronts in so many different ways, whether it's defense, science and technology, there is economics, of course, and culturally. So I think oil, there's just so many different moving parts that I think this trip was expected. However, what is interesting really is that I'm sure you're aware, right? The US president is hosting, currently as we speak this week, he's hosting NATO leaders to celebrate the formation of NATO on one end of the planet. And NATO, as we're aware, was formed after the Second World War, as a way to kind of contain Russia. So it's interesting that that meeting is happening there and this one's happening here. But if you're asking me why now, I don't know why exactly now.
So what's the official position of India regarding the war in Ukraine?
So, Jacob, historically, India, when it comes to conflicts across the world, has always had a very neutral stance. We don't take sides. So when it came to the Ukraine war, we did not condemn Russia. We did not vote in the UN. We did not side with the West when it came to sanctions. But I think time and again, we have issued statements saying that diplomacy is the way forward and killing of civilians is not expected. In fact, just a couple of hours ago, Mr. Modi, I think it was a very, very direct kind of appeal to Putin, saying that war cannot be a solution and diplomacy and peace is the way forward. In fact, he also spoke about children being killed and how that was unacceptable. So I think in terms of statements, India has put out statements from the start, including I don't know if you saw the videos of Mr. Modi and Mr. Putin. Yeah. There was a lot of warmth and friendly kind of energies. However, he did make that statement for whatever its implicit worth is.
I know Modi is a warm person. We've seen this in other countries as well. But I want to ask you, how all of this is aligned with Modi's economic ambitions, very big ones, and his need for the Western economies?
Right. It's interesting. Yes, of course. I think so much of geopolitics is driven by trade and economics, like you mentioned. And for India especially, with Russia, it has been a very complicated and long history that we have with Russia. And things have gone up and things have also gone down. However, in the last couple of years, India has been sourcing oil at a discounted rate. So I think that is definitely going to be on the agenda. I think there is also, the figure for last year's trade was close to 65 billion, which is a huge increase from the previous years. And Indian exports is like minuscule. I think it's about 4 billion. So I think somewhere Mr. Modi will also try and address that imbalance. So economics, yes, but I think looking at it only from an economic point of view is really missing the larger picture, because India needs Russia for many other things. To contain China, for example, right? We aligned with Russia historically in the first place because the US aligned with Pakistan. So it was, this was the Cold War days, post-independence. We needed to balance that, and that's how India and Russia kind of got close. But since then, of course, so much has happened and so much has changed. But today, I think Russia is important, not just, again, not economically only, but also because it helps us contain China in some sense, right? It helps us balance. So with India, if I have to say it simply, I think our stance has always been that we will be strategically always free and autonomous. And we need to align ourselves with multiple partners in an individual capacity and not let those relationships kind of overshadow each other. So it's a kind of balancing act that you see taking place now on your screen as well.
Yeah. Akshay Kumar in Delhi, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim.
Moving to the next area, there are reports of a mass grave in the desert along the Libyan-Tunisian border. In March, at least 65 migrants' bodies were discovered in a mass grave in southwest Libya. I-24 News' Emma Siegel has more on that.
4 months after a mass grave holding at least 65 bodies was discovered in southwest Libya, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights is speaking about more disturbing developments in the region.
We are following up on reports of another mass grave recently discovered in the desert area at the Libyan-Tunisian border. I urge the authorities to respond swiftly to our inquiries and to investigate these crimes fully. The loved ones of those who died have every right to know the truth, and the responsibility for investigating these crimes falls squarely with the Libyan authorities.
As with the graves found in March, there are no details of the suspected identities of the victims or how the site was initially uncovered. But while much of the circumstances remain unknown, some speculate that they died in the process of being smuggled through the desert, a common practice along the Libya-Tunisia border.
We are seeing widespread human rights violations against migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. The dehumanization of these individuals who are in a vulnerable situation continues to take place at the hands of both state and non-state actors, often working in collusion. Trafficking, torture, forced labor, extortion, starvation in intolerable conditions of detention, mass expulsions, the sale of human beings, including children, perpetrated at scale with impunity.
This comes after Libya reopened its border crossing with Tunisia after a 3-month closure, following clashes in March between Libyan government forces and gunmen. Meanwhile, the dangerous region is witnessing another mass casualty. 14 people, including 12 Syrians, died after becoming stranded along Libya's other border in the Algerian desert. The youngest victim was just 10 years old. Like with Libya, Algeria has a huge network of smuggling operations for migrants attempting to cross into Europe, willing to risk the treacherous journey in hopes of a better life.
The Saudis are reaffirming their support for a ceasefire in Sudan. Bastian Bourret, our man in Dubai, is with us now. Bastian, what does it mean exactly?
Well, Jacob, the Saudis have a very opportunistic cooperation with Sudan. That is the explanation, because they are taking advantage of the weakness of the Sudanese economy and state to advance their pawns to the point of supporting whoever will actually allow them to do so on the ground. A few years ago, for instance, Saudi Arabia was supporting President Omar al-Bashir, then went on to support the man who overthrew him in 2019 and who's now Sudan's de facto leader, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, while also supporting his rival, Hemeti. And the result is that the more Saudi involvement in Sudan intensifies, the more the idea of a democratic, civil and stable government in this country seems to recede. But it's also a question of image for Riyadh, as you can imagine, who's using this humanitarian tragedy and this civil war to help the Sudanese, but also to show itself in its best light. Although it's true that Riyadh deserves some credit, one can still wonder about this country's double game in the Sudanese conflict, since it is being fueled by external powers, including Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, and we know that the UAE is also heavily involved. What about them?
It's a bit different. The background of Emirati influence in Sudan really took off some 15, 20 years ago when Abu Dhabi realized that this cooperation could be fruitful. So in recent years, the Emirates have announced the construction of a new port in Sudan on the shores of the Red Sea, a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure. They have granted not only humanitarian aid, but also substantial financial support to the country's central bank. They are investing massively in various sectors, technology, agriculture, telecommunication, even mining, Sudan has an abundance of gold mines and is even one of the largest gold producer on the African continent. And in return, in 2016, the Sudanese broke off diplomatic relations with Iran, and this was a request from the Emiratis and the Saudis. The Sudanese even sent thousands of their soldiers to Yemen to support the Saudi Emirati military campaign against the Houthis. And today they encourage tens of thousands of Sudanese citizens, often from very modest condition, to go and work in the Gulf. So this is ironically a very mutually beneficial relationship.
What do the Sudanese, I guess which Sudanese is the question, but what do they say about all this involvement?
The Sudanese are definitely not all happy about it. We've heard some lawyers recently explored the possibility of legal action against the UAE, against the United Arab Emirates, against Saudi Arabia as well, over their alleged role in the Sudan war. Although both Abu Dhabi and Riyadh have repeatedly denied involvement, they are also pointing to the United Arab Emirates' supposed violation of the UN arms embargo on this Sudanese region of Darfur, an embargo that was established 20 years ago. A group of US Congress members have also expressed concerns, but we're still in the allegation phase of this case.
All right, Bastian Barry in Dubai, thank you very much for that. And this is it for Middle East Now. Stay tuned for the rundown with Sarah Martinez. Have a good night from Tel Aviv.
I was diagnosed with asthma and I couldn't breathe at all. This shortness of breath was very difficult for me. I was even hospitalized. I used a lot of inhalers and inhalations and I didn't sleep during the night. I didn't attend sport classes, and when I did, I needed to use an inhaler after. Ever since my grandmother bought me the Z-Medic Air device, I am more active. I even got accepted to the team, and I no longer wake my parents up or depended on anything. I no longer take medication, and I feel like every other kid.
Por lo menos a mí me dice el papacito que es lo que eres, así que...
En realidad yo no podía, que había viajado. Y no, ya no nos estoy...
Be an animal, what animal would you be?
I'd love to be a dolphin. Hello, human.
A new voice is about to be heard.
אתם צופים בערוץ החדשות I-24 News.
I-24 News launches its fourth channel in Hebrew, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
ותיעדו את הטבח.
I-24 News in Hebrew brings its international success for the past 10 years to Israel. Real-time news, sharp analyses, and passionate debates on the burning issues shaping Israeli society and the entire Middle East. And for you, English-speaking viewers, I-24 News offers a unique, immersive experience. Every day until 11 a.m. EST, Hebrew programs will be broadcast live with English subtitles. And from 11 a.m. EST, back to your favorite shows in English. More than ever, the heart of a new Middle East beats on I-24 News.
Coming up on the program, after an apparent successful day of talks in Cairo, Shin Bet Chief Ronen Bar and head of Mossad David Barnea will fly to Qatar tomorrow to continue negotiations on a ceasefire and hostage release deal. 2 people are in critical condition after a Hezbollah rocket directly hit a vehicle in the Golan Heights amid a barrage of some 40 rockets fired from Lebanon a short while ago. The Lebanese terror group says the latest attack is in response to the IDF allegedly killing one of its senior members in a targeted airstrike also on a moving vehicle while traveling along the Damascus-Beirut road. Good evening, I'm Sarah Martinez-Amir, and you're watching The Rundown on I-24 News live from Tel Aviv. It's day 277 of the Israel-Hamas war, and the Israeli negotiating team has returned from Cairo, where it held talks with American and Egyptian mediators for a ceasefire and hostage release deal. It appears negotiations are advancing to the next stage. The head of Shin Bet Ronen Bar will join Mossad Chief David Barnea in Qatar tomorrow, where they will meet with CIA Chief William Burns, the Qatari Prime Minister, and Egyptian intelligence. In the latest push for a deal, the family of Israeli hostage Daniela Gilboa agreed to air a video of her from captivity, released by Hamas back in January. The family is hoping Daniela's pleas will be heard by mediators and help push the current proposal through. But until then, the fighting in Gaza continues, with the IDF making major gains inside the Strip. Our Nicole Tzedek has the details.
As talks on a ceasefire and hostage release deal are seemingly moving forward, the family of Israeli hostage Daniela Gilboa, an IDF spotter, approved airing a video of her from captivity, released in January by Hamas as a psychological warfare ploy.
I've been a prisoner of Hamas for 107 days, and I don't know when, if at all, I'll return home. I'm under bombs and fire 24 hours a day. I'm very, very afraid for my life. You even once almost killed me with your bombs.
Gilboa was taken captive from the Nahal Oz base on October 7th. She was one of the 5 female soldiers seen in the recently released video of the abduction from the base. Gilboa's family permitted airing the video, with her mother, Orly, begging Israeli leaders to reach a deal that will see the release of the hostages.
Where were you on October 7th when I was kidnapped from my bed? Where are you now? Why should I, as a soldier who gave 100% of myself in service of my country, feel that I have been abandoned and forsaken? Get over yourselves, dear government, and start doing your job as is necessary. Bring us home while we're still alive.
The video comes as Shin Bet Chief Ronen Bar met with CIA Chief Bill Burns and Egyptian security officials in Cairo on Monday, where they discussed the Gaza hostage and ceasefire deal, as well as arrangements to secure the Egypt-Gaza border. Ahead of the meeting, Hamas accused Prime Minister Netanyahu of raising obstacles on the negotiations, warning that continued IDF operation in the Gaza Strip could derail the talks, which are expected to continue in Doha on Wednesday. Meanwhile, the IDF continues its operation in Gaza City, in the north of the Strip, and in Rafah to the south. The military said its forces eliminated dozens of terrorists over the past day and destroyed different terror infrastructure, including 6 underground tunnels in Gaza City's Shajaya neighborhood alone. Operations that show no sign of slowing down unless a hostage release deal is pushed ahead.
And joining me in studio is security analyst Rafael Yerushalmi, former IDF senior intelligence officer, and I-24 News correspondent Nicole Tzedek. Thank you both for joining me here in studio this evening. Nicole, I want to begin with you. We're hearing a flurry of conflicting reports surrounding these hostage ceasefire talks. What can you tell us at this hour? Do we have any details about the current proposal that's on the table? Do we know how many hostages would be released in that first phase of the deal?
This current proposal, it really all does stem around the proposal that U.S. President Joe Biden first announced back in the very end of May, stating that this was the Israeli proposal. Now, since then, we've seen a lot of back and forth. The U.S. and these other mediators, specifically Egypt and Qatar, continuing to push to try and iron out the details and the remaining gaps between Hamas and between Israel. And so what we have right now on the table is still some form of that, yet it's still the ironed out details that they're working on. As far as the number of hostages that could be released, we don't know specifically how many, but we're still looking at the women, the elderly, the sick, and the children all exchanged for likely hundreds of Palestinian security prisoners. And the specifics around the Palestinian security prisoners is likely one of the details that is still being hashed out. It was just yesterday that we heard the reports that Hamas doesn't want to see Israel to have the veto power to say which prisoners are released and which prisoners aren't released. But many of the prisoners, we're talking about terrorists with blood on their hands that are inside these prisons for attempting, and many of them successfully attempting, to go after Israeli Jews. So these are the specifics of the details that right now, as you mentioned, mediators are working hard to talk about, and that's really what we're seeing behind the closed doors.
Rafael, I want to get your take on the current negotiations. Are you optimistic as to what we're seeing so far?
No, not really. I think it's, first of all, a very bad deal. We have no choice, let's put it that way. There's no alternative. So what we're going for is maybe a first phase. I do not believe 1 minute there will be a second and third phase. It's too complicated. There were too many things that can go wrong in between phases. And I believe that's what we call the boys and the soldiers. They don't have all these weeks of truce to survive. They will be dead before that. So it's a very, very bad deal of maybe saving a few hostages in a first phase. And what is very surprising is that everything is in the open, everything is discussed, analyzed. I mean, we know every comma, every change of word of the text of this proposal. This is utterly ridiculous. Such a negotiation should be led in total secrecy, very discreet. The very fact that it's publicized influences the negotiation in a bad way. It emboldens Sinwar and the Hamas. All this publicity around them, that's exactly what they want. They just put us where they wanted us. They do not have any really interest now in liberating hostages. We can give them hundreds of terrorists, but it's not their interest right now. Their interest right now is to hold on to these hostages and to make the price go higher and higher and higher. Hopefully, as I said, and we have no choice, we will accept for a very, very high price. First phase, hoping we can liberate at least some of these people.
All right, stay with me. I want to turn to the war zone on the Israel-Lebanon border. 2 people are currently in critical condition after a Hezbollah rocket directly hit a vehicle in the Golan Heights amid a barrage of some 40 rockets fired from Lebanon this evening. Those are images of that vehicle right there, covered completely on fire. Hezbollah says that rocket attack is in response to the killing of a senior Hezbollah member earlier today in a strike also on a moving vehicle along the Damascus-Beirut road. According to Saudi media, Abu al-Fadl Kalnabash was once Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah's bodyguard. He was later charged with transferring forces and weapons from Syria for Hezbollah. Meanwhile, the Lebanese terror group has published what it claims are photographs taken by a drone that crossed into Israel and shows IDF bases and military infrastructure in northern Israel. And let's cross over to I-24 News correspondent Zach Anders. He's in northern Israel. Zach, what's the situation where you are at this hour?
Yeah, we're hearing that just as of 15 or 20 minutes ago, the regional council has, in the Golan Heights, has issued basically a stay where you are kind of order and to be close to shelters. And that's something that we expect to last throughout the night. It's not any indication that there's a belief that the attacks are going to continue. This is precautionary. This is something that we've often seen take place after some of these more deadly attacks here in northern Israel. And this is a directive coming from the regional council, not the IDF. What is right now confirmed is that the two inside the vehicle, which you might be able to see on screen now, it is the two inside the vehicle in critical condition. We have no confirmation otherwise of any other news and updates. We're seeing some of the other networks post other information. At this point, from what we're hearing, that is all that is confirmed through the National Ambulance Service and through the hospitals here in the north. It's also, I've already seen a few news networks confuse the two different vehicles hit, the one that killed the Nasrallah bodyguard on the Damascus Road, confusing some of the details with what's just taken place in the Golan Heights. So we're going to be very cautious this afternoon as we wade through some of these details. We also don't know if these are civilians inside the vehicle, traveling on a civilian road, of course. This road's now been shut down as a result of this, and it's being described as a result of falls from this barrage, although as you see some of the damage, it took what looks like it had to have been a direct hit. The amount of damage to the front end of that Dacia is extreme, and of course the subsequent fire. It's not clear if bystanders pulled them from the vehicle, although we were seeing some other images earlier that suggest as much. So we're still working to put together confirmable details here. But obviously, on the backs of what has been a very eventful few days, this punctuates again how deadly and dangerous the situation here is on the northern border of Israel.
Zach, what more can you tell us about this drone footage of IDF bases in the north released by Hezbollah? Are defense officials concerned?
And we haven't heard an official response from the IDF or from anyone involved in the aerial defense that we would often speak to. And, you know, this is a major concern because 3 weeks ago when we had the first clips shared by Hezbollah, that was around the coastline. That was the port of Haifa. I personally don't think it makes much of a big difference, but we had some security analysts say, well, potentially if that drone was out over the coast and that's why it wasn't intercepted or detected, any of that, I don't think it matters. This time, though, different, being that this is over the Golan Heights, potentially with Hezbollah claiming with the same kind of drone they used as before, and that's a really large drone, about the size of a small car, a small sedan, very slow. It would be easily detected, or at least you would think, be picked up and detected by radar signatures or air defense systems, some of these special pieces of military equipment that are stationed here along the northern border. What we should stress is that while this clip is almost 10 minutes long, it only has about 3 to 4 minutes worth of actual footage, and the rest is heavily edited screen freezes at key moments, and so that plays out the length of the video. But some of the sites that they're showing, concern there because they're air defense batteries. You can see very clearly some of the Iron Dome installations. You can see some of the radar sites, even troop movement on the ground of soldiers located in different places. So that's definitely a concern there. But I should stress once again that for those semi-professionals or even consumers that have a subscription to Airbus or Maxar satellite data, publicly updated satellite data, they could get some of these images themselves of sites all around the world as well. So it's not like some of these things that are shown in the video are massive secrets. The big concern, though, is was Hezbollah capable of invading Israeli airspace for this long to take these images and to do so unabated?
All right, Zach Anders, thank you very much for that update from northern Israel. Stay safe. I want to turn back to my panel now in studio. Rafael, I want to ask you, we've witnessed 2 people critically injured in this latest barrage of rockets from Hezbollah. What is the red line here for Israel to declare enough is enough, we're going to an all-out war with Hezbollah?
Well, if you're talking red line, we've passed that red line a long time ago. So the fact that there is no decision at the government level what to do or not to do with this Hezbollah problem is a bit of a bother, because I don't see any difference of what's happening today to what happened 2 or 3 months ago, and might happen 2 or 3 months from now if no decision is taken. We see that we have no effect of deterrence on the Hezbollah. On the other hand, we still have determination enough to eliminate allegedly high-ranking representative of Hezbollah, even though we know that the Hezbollah will react promptly with quite a salvo of missiles and rockets. So this ping-pong has been going on and on. Today was just sheer bad luck of these two people in the car. The Golan Heights is usually a very quiet area. These roads are not very frequented by a lot of vehicles, so it's really bad luck. On the other hand, on the other side of the border, the Hezbollah people are now fearing to move around. They have a lot of new orders, instructions being given to them. They're not allowed to have their portable phones on with them. They have to change cars, to buy new vehicles. They are really getting afraid and frightened by these targeted killings. But as we said, this is just a bad routine and a totally unacceptable routine. It shouldn't be such a routine with tens of thousands of people away from their homes. And the fact that the Hezbollah, as we saw today, yet again is learning, is practicing, is training. Day after day, they're getting better. Their time is playing into their hands, not into our hands. It's bad for us. And they're just training, and they're getting more and more sophisticated equipment, including that drone of today, coming straight from Iran. This is a very regretful situation that we do not have right now government that taking a decision what to do with the North, what to do with a lot of things. But I can assure you that the Chief of the Air Force and the Chief of the Northern Command have said to the Chief of General Staff of the IDF that they have no problem escalating this conflict and going on a full-fledged war, even though there's still some job to be done in the south in Gaza. Unfortunately, they haven't been given the green light. The last proposal they put on the table of the Security Cabinet and the government was a moderate operation, including terrestrial penetration of southern Lebanon, but very limited, just to push back the Radwan force of the Hezbollah a few kilometers up north from the Israeli border. That's it. They haven't had the green light for that, and now the situation is more on the brink of a much larger scale war would it happen.
Nicole, where do diplomatic efforts stand at this hour to quell that violence on the border?
A lot of it revolves around the ceasefire negotiations we were just talking about. A lot of Israeli officials are hopeful that if a ceasefire in the south does come forward, then Hezbollah will keep its word and say, hey, we've only been continuing to fire towards Israel as an act of solidarity with everything that's happening in Gaza. And so they continue to say if a ceasefire is going through in Gaza, then they will stop firing on northern Israel. However, that in itself is not enough for Israel, not enough for the tens of thousands of evacuated residents to return home. So the main dilemma then following that is that possibly a ceasefire in the south could give enough room for diplomatic action to actually take place in the north. Because right now, with the daily cross-border attacks that we're seeing every day escalating little by little, as we've just seen today, that's not enough room for diplomatic actions to take place. This is why we're seeing this increased military action. But that's why they're hoping that a ceasefire in the south could bring just enough calm for these diplomatic efforts to actually come to fruition.
Let's hope a diplomatic solution will even be enough to convince that Lebanese terror group to move away from the border. I want to move on to a different angle this evening. In a bid to gain more decision-making power in Israel's war with Hamas, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir refused to vote with the coalition on a Shas-fronted bill. But the breakdown between parties afterwards may have been more than he bargained for. More on this report by Emma Siegel.
Once again, it looks as though Israel's government is in crisis. On Monday night, Public Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir refused to vote in favor of a bill put forward by the ultra-Orthodox Shas party. The hardline Ben-Gvir has been angling for months to be included in Israel's now-defunct war cabinet. And this latest move is a tactic to be allowed to have greater say in Israel's war with Hamas. But his gamble didn't pay off. After Ben-Gvir's party conditioned its support for the vote, the government pulled the legislation from the docket, and a number of Shas members of Knesset walked out of the session in protest. Shas then released a heated statement taking personal aim at Ben-Gvir.
The right-wing bloc discovered again this evening that as regards the inflated balloon named Itamar Ben-Gvir, as great the expectation, so strong is the disappointment. Neither right nor strong. A series of embarrassing failures in his area of responsibility, while spraying responsibility, threats and accusations on the whole world. A noise machine and zero action. Ben-Gvir, in his childish behavior and insanity with his arrogance, is doing everything to destroy the government from within, destroy its foundations, and loyally serves the political parties on the left. Right-wing governments have always been overthrown by people of his type. The public will know and judge.
In response, Ben-Gvir slammed Shas leader Aryeh Deri as, quote, a lapdog of the left, and also targeted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
The absurd reality in which we're floundering in Gaza, on the northern border, handcuffing the IDF, conducting negotiations with promiscuous opening conditions, on the way to a political settlement that is all surrender to terrorism on all fronts. When the Prime Minister conducts himself as a one-man government, makes the decisions alone, and isolates his natural partners in the government, including cabinet meetings that are emptied of meaningful content, it is intolerable.
And now, according to Israeli Khan media network, Deri told the Prime Minister that, quote, there is no point for the government to continue if it is not functioning. The infighting aggravates already strained relations between members of the coalition, which observers say and opponents hope could be moving closer to collapse.
All right, my next guest is Samuel Hyde, writer and researcher for the Jewish Policy Institute. Thank you very much for joining me this evening, Samuel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I want to get your take on that statement by the Shas party accusing National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir of being childish, arrogant, and destroying the government from within.
I mean, in my view, it might have been the most accurate thing they've said in quite some time. But look, the way I see things is this tension between the Haredi parties and essentially the religious Zionist faction is actually fundamental to the very nature of each of their current priorities. And you can now see the cracks between these parties opening. And now you see that the government and that Israelis, for the most part, are actually not on the same page. 2/3 want the government gone, but here's where it gets interesting and it actually sheds light on it all, because the same amount actually think that there should be some sort of military offensive against Hezbollah. And what this tells us is that for the most part, the most primal desire right now in a post-October 7th world for Israelis is security. They want to get rid of the government who they feel abandoned them. And they want to deal with the other threat that faces them up north, namely Hezbollah. And this is where the tension lies between the Haredim, whose main priority is seeking a full military exemption, and the religious Zionist faction, who continue to talk about every single day, calling it a miraculous time, to seek settlement expansion. Now, either way you look at this, the political programs in a post-October 7th reality, these two things contradict each other, meaning we know that properly protecting settlements in the West Bank has required a massive deployment of forces, as their mission has always been unique, which is to secure civilians, Israeli civilians living in the heart of enemy territory. And the IDF has always deployed somewhere between 50 to even sometimes 75% of its overall combat forces into the West Bank. This has been more than the forces assigned to borders on all other fronts put together. That's Lebanon, Hezbollah, Syria, the two border fronts with Gaza and Hamas, Sinai, the Arava Strip. And this was, of course, on full display in the disparity of troops deployed to the two border fronts with Gaza on October 7th. So essentially, you have a troop deployment issue here because there aren't enough. Okay, and if you have one side who's seeking to build more settlements, which requires more troops, and then you have another side who's trying to completely exempt themselves from any sort of service, which only degrades the amount of troops that we have, you have a fundamental contradiction between the two priorities. And I really think that that is the fundamental thing lying underneath all this tension.
Do you believe that those coalition tensions could lead to the dissolution of the Knesset in an upcoming election?
I think it would be the responsible thing to do at this point. For one of the parties, it would likely be Shas. That's the way I would see it. I mean, as I said earlier, you've got 2/3 of the country who are against the current government, and for very good reasons, not just because of October 7th and post-October 7th, but there was a large portion of the country against the government prior to October 7th. And frankly, for what it's worth, they don't actually contain the moral mandate to run this country anymore. We do have the threat up north. We know that Israelis, that needs to be dealt with. And I just cannot see a world in which they are able to get the job done with a political program that follows any sort of military victory, that actually requires the victory to be cemented. You cannot have any sort of victory in these military campaigns without a political program. I don't see any way. I think it would be the right thing, if there's any decency left in these politicians, to step away from their positions and to dissolve the Knesset for the best interests of the state of Israel and the Zionist project at large.
Samuel, how are these tensions and recent statements made by Ben-Gvir threatening to quit the coalition if Netanyahu goes ahead with the current deal affecting negotiations?
Well, I think it's the same situation Netanyahu has found himself in since the beginning. He's juggling between maybe the decisions he seeks to make, the pressure he has from the Biden administration and other factions in the international community, and people on the more hard right. And what this does is it essentially keeps us in a total stalemate. And this goes to the question that you asked before. We need to make progress. We need to move forward. We need to rebuild. And we cannot continue to find ourselves in stalemate, being essentially held captive by two ministers who, I mean, one was literally banned from serving in the military. He should be nowhere near decisions on this regard, especially in one of the most consequential wars of Israel's existence. So it seems to me like we've got to the point where I think everyone's getting tired of the stalemate that we find ourselves in, and I cannot see a way in which we cannot be in that stalemate as long as this current coalition continues to exist.
And briefly, Samuel, Netanyahu issued non-negotiable Israeli demands just as hostage talks resumed on Sunday. Some security officials and mediators accused the prime minister of intentionally sabotaging that deal. I want to get your take on that and how much of that pressure from Ben-Gvir influenced that statement by the premier.
It's very possible that there was influence going on behind there. But I agree that at the end of the day, like I said, there's this stalemate, and I can comfortably say I don't think that the government is doing everything within its power in that regard. But we're also dealing with a psychopathic regime in Gaza who really doesn't, for their own sake, want the ceasefire. It is actually serving many, many interests to not have it. So, you're dealing with a complicated situation. It doesn't all, for all my critique and all my harsh criticism that I've just leveled out at the government, this situation doesn't obviously all fall on the government and the Biden administration. You're dealing essentially with jihadists who don't play according to the ethical and normal rules.
All right, Samuel, we do have to go out for a quick break. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
because it haven't reached the... What's the other one?
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back, and thanks for staying with us here on The Rundown. Still with me in studio is my panel, security analyst Rafael Yerushalmi, former senior intelligence officer, and I-24 News correspondent Nicole Tzedek. I want to turn with both of you to the topic we were speaking about before the break, and specifically the internal political tensions that we're seeing within the coalition. And Rafael, how is it being viewed by our enemies, and how is it being or affecting, more specifically, their campaign against Israel?
Well, it led to the 7th of October in a way, because that's this internal division of Israeli politics, but also the Israeli society at large, was interpreted by our enemies as a weakening of the country, a point of weakness and a good opportunity to strike, because the people are divided, the government is divided, and unfortunately it is the first time in the history of Israel since 1948 that there is a war and that there is not a united front on the political level. Usually
seems 9 months later we haven't learned our lesson of October 7th.
No, and unfortunately this is a war. There's a war going on. I mean, all this circus, political circus, because by now it's really pathetic. I mean, it's ridiculous. In peacetime it's okay, you can bear with it, it's the price of democracy, but in wartime certainly not. And as I said, it's never happened before in the state of Israel that the politicians should be so divided and not united in times of war, which is okay, maybe opposition as towards coalition, but now even inside the coalition they're arguing at the time where they all have to concentrate on one and single thing, is liberate the hostages. They should all be working only on that. They shouldn't be doing anything else, think of anything else. I mean, the religious, they're thinking of whether to draft or not draft their guys. The other people are thinking of their budgets and the coalition agreements and money here and settlements there. I mean, for God's sake, I mean, there are priorities here, and the priorities are very clear. They are clear to the Israeli people anyway. Why aren't they clear to the politicians?
Rafael, you touched on a very important issue right now, which is the conscription of the ultra-Orthodox. Nicole, the Defense Ministry announced today that Gallant has approved the Army's recommendation to summon ultra-Orthodox to begin their conscription process in the upcoming months. What more can you tell us about this pretty groundbreaking development?
Certainly. And in this development, it does follow the landmark ruling from the High Court of Justice not long ago that said that the government can no longer have these blanket draft exemptions for ultra-religious Orthodox yeshiva students, and that they have to start drafting them to IDF service. Now, when we're taking a look at just some of the numbers, according to the court, they said some 63,000 young Haredi men are currently not enlisted in the IDF. And so now, following a situational assessment just this this morning, meeting with IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi, Defense Minister Gallant decided that it is in the best move to follow the IDF's recommendations and enlist these young Haredi men. And so at least what we can see in the next future, they said this is going to be coming in the next month. So over the course of the next month, there's going to be an informational campaign spreading throughout the ultra-Orthodox community to tell them exactly what this enlistment might entail and specifically who might be drafted up first. It's likely going to be some of the young Haredi men who are not currently studying in yeshiva schools. Those will likely be some of the people who get those summons first.
And Rafael, of course, 60,000 potential soldiers is significant, but of course those soldiers won't be ready for this war. But I want to ask you how crucial this conscription is, specifically from a reservist point of view, right? Because we're seeing reservists being called again and again and again. Some have been called up 4 times now at this point during this war. From a morale point of view, how important is this?
Yes, but not only moral for sure. I mean, why should some people take all the burden on their shoulders and risk their lives, and others just sit at home, do nothing? That's for sure. But also, it's very necessary support. Some jobs are logistical jobs that it takes a long time to build a fighter. It takes almost a year of basic training to get to a fighter. But there are many jobs in the army that do not necessitate that longer training. It can be logistical support. It can be driving. There are many things that would actually relieve some of the reservists to do more important tasks. So you could start by that. I want to remind everybody that there are not many, but there are yeshiva students who do serve in the military, and they serve in extremely good conditions considering their religious faith. I mean, they have total kashrut. They do not have girls in their unit. I mean, I served in the Navy, in the military service, in the submarines, where you can barely move. You have 2 sinks, and the food is kosher. You have things for milkshake and for right. So it's kosher. And let's just remind also these brave yeshiva students that the biggest mitzvah a Jew can perform ever is to defend the Holy Land and the people of Israel. That's the ultimate mitzvah. And there are also alternatives today to military service, which is the national service, to work in certain civilian areas where there's also a need of personnel. So all in all, there is a need. There are some rabbis and there are some yeshivas that do give the okay to their
It's a first step forward, let's call it that way.
So it depends on the rabbis, really. They have to give the order. It's like it's another army, right? But in that army, the generals are the heads of yeshiva and rabbis.
Fadi Ushami, thank you very much for your insight. Nicole Tzedek, as always. I want to turn to a different front now, the ongoing threat out of Yemen. Shipping remains disrupted, Gulf nations are worried, and Israel is still being targeted by drones and missiles. Our Jody Nisilovic has more.
An Israeli Air Force jet downed a suspicious aerial object late Monday night as it was heading to Israel's southern city of Eilat from the direction of the Red Sea. The aerial object was most likely sent by Yemen's Houthi terrorists, whose military spokesman, Yahya Sari, claimed the operation was a success without divulging more information.
The Yemeni armed forces, alongside the Iraqi Islamic resistance, carried out a joint military operation targeting a vital target in al-Rashrash, south of occupied Palestine, with a number of drones.
This latest incident comes after last week's attack launched by the group on a ship traveling through the same area, only the most recent in a series of targets in this crucial maritime route. Adding further fuel to the fire, the Houthis, who claim that the US and Saudi Arabia sought to economically destroy Houthi-controlled Yemen after failing militarily, released aerial footage of key ports and airports in Saudi Arabia, aiming to remind them that they are still capable of striking deep inside the kingdom. Since November, the Iranian-backed Houthis have been launching drone and missile strikes in shipping lanes, in what the group claims is solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza.
The Yemeni armed forces will persist to carry out their joint military operation with the Iraq Islamic resistance in support of and solidarity with the Palestinian people until the aggression stops and the siege on the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip is lifted.
In an effort to discourage more attacks, the US-British naval coalition stationed in the region has conducted air raids and missile strikes against Houthi targets. Meanwhile, in an effort to push the Yemen peace plan forward, a Chinese diplomat announced that Beijing, along with the UN Special Envoy for Yemen, 5 permanent UN Security Council members, and other key parties would begin working together.
We must ensure the Red Sea security and make our position clear to the Houthis and other parties. The Red Sea crisis has lasted nearly 6 months, causing significant losses. We call for an end to these attacks.
He added that China would be closely monitoring the Red Sea situation, but urged an end to attacks on commercial vessels to avoid disrupting global supply chains.
Well, if there was any doubt, Iran's newly elected President Masoud Pezeshkian's first days in office offer a clear indication as to the direction he plans to take Iran. His first letter to a foreign leader was to Hezbollah's Hassan Nasrallah, and his first phone call was to Russia's Vladimir Putin. And the U.S. says it's not rushing to return to the negotiating table quite yet. Middle East correspondent Ayad Osman has more.
Iran has a new president, but those who hoped to see a true reformist rather than a regime loyalist are in for a disappointment.
I consider your vote a heavy responsibility on my shoulders, and I pledge to continue to be a listening ear for your words and a voice for the voiceless and rejected.
In his first public appearance as president, Iran's newly elected president, Masoud Pezeshkian, reminded everyone who actually calls the shots in Tehran.
First, the Supreme Leader must be thanked, because if the Supreme Leader were not present, my name definitely would not have come out the ballot boxes.
In his first days in office, Pezeshkian received a flurry of congratulatory messages from Axis supporters. His first phone call was to Russian President Vladimir Putin, where Pezeshkian promised to strengthen the bond between Tehran and Moscow. And Pezeshkian's first letter to a foreign leader was to Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah, in which he vowed to continue backing what he and Hezbollah call the resistance.
The Islamic Republic of Iran considers supporting Lebanon, its security, government, people, and resistance a key principle. When necessary, Iran will not hesitate to support Lebanon and its security.
The Iranian spokesperson added that diplomatic channels between Iran and the U.S. remain open, and that negotiations over the nuclear file and sanctions removal are ongoing. As for Washington, it does not expect any changes to Tehran's policies or behavior.
We're not in a position where we're willing to get back to the negotiating table with Iran just based on the fact that they've elected a new president. They're still supporting terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. They're still supporting the Houthis as the Houthis attack ships in the Red Sea. They're still attacking shipping as well. And they're still supplying drones and drone technology and drone expertise to the Russians so that the Russians can continue to kill innocent Ukrainians like they did over the weekend. So no.
The latest example was given on Monday as new satellite images show major expansion at 2 key Iranian ballistic missile facilities near Tehran, believed to be for boosting missile production. And with Iran continuing to enrich uranium to near weapons-grade levels at record pace, one should not expect significant changes in Iran's policy, if any.
And the U.S. Columbia University has permanently removed 3 administrators for their roles and placed them on indefinite leave for sending disturbing texts with anti-Semitic tropes. The text messages sent during a panel about Jewish life on the Ivy League school campus downplayed and called into question accounts of campus anti-Semitism and suggested that a Hillel official was leveraging them for fundraising. In one instance, one of the deans sent a vomit emoji in reference to a campus rabbi's op-ed about anti-Semitism. In an accompanying letter, Columbia President Minouche Shafik vowed to start a vigorous program of anti-Semitism and anti-discrimination training in the fall when classes reconvene. I want to cross over to I-24 News senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim, who joins us from Columbia University in New York City. Mike, what more can you tell us about this disturbing incident? And I just want to clarify, these 3 deans were not fired, and apparently a 4th dean was also involved in the incident.
That's correct. The dean of Columbia College has since apologized for the incident and therefore is being allowed to maintain his role as a dean of that particular college. However, his associate dean has been put on leave and removed from that role, as has the dean of undergraduate student life and the associate dean of student and family support. But as you mentioned, even though they've been removed from those specific roles for their role in these anti-Semitic and text messages and have been placed on indefinite leave, they have not been, as you mentioned, fired from the university. And that's what has Jewish students and faculty and staff members here at Columbia upset. They say it's simply not enough. You can remove them from the roles, you can suspend them until they're actually fired. It's not a strong enough sign that the university is finally ready and willing and able to deal with these incidents of anti-Semitism on campus. Now, some of these longtime employees are protected by tenure, protected by other employment agreements. That's the university's line right now, at least in a non-public setting, that they simply can't get rid of these administrators and faculty members because of their employment agreements. However, students we've spoken to here on campus in the Jewish community say, in the end, if the university really wanted to show something stronger, they could do it. It's the university in the end that's not living up to their end of the bargain. In the meantime, yes, the president of the university says there will be stronger reporting mechanisms in terms of anti-Semitism and other forms of discrimination on campus, that there will be, in fact, stronger teaching methods, training methods for faculty and staff that will also filter down to students. But that's all for the time being. There is congressional involvement right now in terms of the House Education and Workforce Committee. They say they're going to continue their investigations and require more of Columbia University and other universities in terms of fighting anti-Semitism. By the way, a related note, just today, New York University settled, largely confidentially, a lawsuit brought by Jewish students there for discrimination on campus. Most of the terms are under wraps right now. However, the president of NYU said that there will be, again, stronger reporting and training methods on campus and a strengthening of the existing relationship with Tel Aviv University.
And Mike, you mentioned that you've spoken to some of these Jewish students from Columbia. Do they feel safe to walk around on campus now?
Campus has reopened here for the most part, although you still need, an identification. It's not open to the general public. But there was, as part of an agreement reached with Columbia after the encampment protest here back in May, there was an agreement reached that if you want an escort around campus, if you feel unsafe and want an escort, that the university will provide an escort, largely from their public safety department, to take you around campus. Doesn't mean it hasn't happened yet. We haven't found anyone that's requested an escort as of yet. However, the Department of Public Safety, we asked them how popular is that program so far, how many have availed themselves of it. They say they're keeping that information under wraps for the time being. I think once campus gets back into full swing in the fall, remember these are just summer courses, which not everybody takes. Once we get back into the fall, I think we'll have a better idea of the safety situation for the Jewish community here on campus.
All right, Mike Wagenheim, thank you very much for that update from Columbia University on a very disturbing incident. Thank you. It's been 9 months and 2 days since October 7th massacre, and the IDF has admitted that it failed to defend Kibbutz Be'eri. For the kibbutz residents, the bereaved families, and the families of the hostages, this is, of course, an obvious fact, but the admission of failure is of immense importance. All the details in the report by Inon Shalom of our sister Hebrew channel.
For the first time, the IDF is acknowledging the obvious, that it failed to defend Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th. IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi has received the findings of the first military inquiry into the events of October 7th. Choosing Kibbutz Be'eri for the first inquiry is perhaps symbolic. It was the hardest hit community on October 7th, with 126 people, including 16 IDF soldiers, killed. The fierce fighting there began with the invasion of more than 100 terrorists into the kibbutz, continued with a brutal massacre until the arrival of the forces, and ended with intense battles, which continued in the following days.
Police, Shiraz speaking.
Hi Shiraz, this is Yasmin. I'm in Kibbutz Be'eri, in the same house with 50 other hostages and some Palestinian guys. They want to release us, the hostages, and they want to live here peacefully.
Among the heroic battles, the IDF is also investigating the incident at the home of Pesi Cohen. An IDF commander ordered a tank to fire at the home where Hamas terrorists were holding 14 hostages. 13 of the hostages were killed in the intense fighting. The incident has become a symbol of the impossible decisions on that Black Saturday, including the conclusions and repercussions for senior officers like Barak Hiram, who commanded the battle.
Suddenly, a terrible boom, and I can't move my legs. I say to Dushi, my husband, I think I've been hit. And then there was a second boom, and I see a hole in Dushi's main artery. I take my thumb and make a tourniquet, because what else can I do?
The investigation submitted earlier this week for the first time formulates recommendations moving forward. It will later be forwarded to the 23 families of the victims in Be'eri, from there to the Be'eri community, and finally, it will be presented to the public on the IDF's website. It's the first inquiry out of more than 40 regarding the events of October 7th, and it starts with one unequivocal conclusion that the IDF can state even before it is released to the public. We failed to defend Kibbutz Be'eri on October 7th.
The people of Kibbutz Be'eri need to get answers. They need to hear exactly what happened that day.
Well, how do you heal from severe trauma? For the survivors of Hamas's massacre of Israel on October 7th, the journey towards recovery is a long and complicated process. But this week, an unlikely event is being held to bring at least a little relief to those suffering. Our anchor and correspondent, Natasha Kirchhoff, has the scoop.
I asked from him to do something for me with a strong animal and a skull. I am the strong animal, and the skull is something inside me. What happened to me in the 7th of October has made me stronger. I never come back to be the same what I did before, but I can be better. And I get my present, Josh, because he's like me.
Yeah, my present too.
He's looked tough, but he's like a baby bear inside.
This is a present for you, but it's also a great privilege for me. So.
Thank you.
This is Aviv Cohen. He's one of dozens of survivors of Hamas's attacks on southern Israel on October 7th that have shown up in this office space today. This isn't a professional tattoo shop, but these survivors are here to get free tattoos from some of the world's most famous artists who have flown to Israel from across the world to volunteer their skills.
Just knowing what happened on October 7th, there was no way that I could not come. You know, in America, there's absolutely no outlet in the media that will ever show like the reality of what happened in Israel on October 7th. Just needed to kind of put my eyes on the situation myself.
Joshua Palmer is a famous tattoo artist from California. He's not Jewish. In fact, this is his first time in Israel, like many of the artists that are here today. And he says the trip has already changed his life.
Once we got here to Israel, we went down south. We went to the kibbutzim, went to the Nova grounds, and I mean, it's terrible. Anybody that doesn't agree with how terrible that was and how much right Israel has to do whatever they need to do to bring these people home, they're either insane or they're misinformed.
This is my brother, Guy Gilboa Dalal. He's 23 years old now. He turned 23 years old 1 month ago, western Gaza.
Gal Gilboa Dalal was at the Nova Music Festival with his little brother Guy on October 7th. When Hamas terrorists infiltrated the party, the two got separated. Gal ran and hid for hours, but Guy got brutally kidnapped by gunmen. He's now been in captivity in the Gaza Strip for over 276 days.
I did a tattoo of the cherry blossom because my brother, he was kidnapped from the Nova Festival. He always wanted to go to Japan to see the cherry blossom. He was actually supposed to be there on April, but as you probably know, he's still in Gaza, so I hope we will see it next April. After what I've gone through, I felt that I need to put it on me in a way that will remind me not just the bad things, but also the good things and the hope that I still have.
This week, around 150 survivors of October 7th are getting tattoos thanks to the organization Healing Inc., which has been putting together events like this for almost a decade.
Healing Inc. has been in Israel every year since 2016. Healing Inc. covers the scars of terror survivors, those injured in combat, families of victims, and the captive to help them reclaim their bodies and continue to heal both physically and emotionally. We really allow individuals agency over themselves again. What happened to them was visited upon them. Their pain was inflicted by others. Now they're saying, this is my choice. I'm going to choose how my body looks. I'm going to choose the decisions I make for myself.
My parents went to the Nova Festival, and when all the terror began, they started running away. Terrorists ran after them, and they arrived at the entrance of the village, Yachini, and entered a public bomb shelter. But my dad decided to come outside so that the terrorists would take him and wouldn't realize that my mom was still hiding inside. They dragged him inside the village and tried to make him knock on the doors on the different houses so people would open up and come out. But he didn't agree to do it, so they shot him. At the same time, my mom managed to escape.
I'm getting a chain of flowers around my arm because when I was trying to get away from one of the terrorists, he hit me with the back of his gun, and I had a really big bruise and injury on my arm. So I decided that I want the place of the injury to bloom, so that it won't be remembered as a place of sadness.
I think a tattoo is forever. It will stay physically on me for the rest of my life. Unfortunately, my father will not be with me for my whole life, so at least I'll have this tattoo on me all the time. And if you're just joining us, here's a quick recap of our top stories this evening. The head of Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, will join Mossad chief David Barnea in Qatar tomorrow, where they will meet with CIA chief William Burns, the Qatari prime minister, and Egyptian intelligence to continue hostage and ceasefire negotiations. Meanwhile, 2 people are in critical condition after a Hezbollah rocket directly hit a vehicle in the Golan Heights amid a barrage of some 40 rockets fired from Lebanon this evening. And that's a wrap for the rundown this evening. If you missed anything, you can always catch up on our website, i24news.tv, and of course on social media. I'm Sarah Martinez Amir. Thanks for watching i24 News.